Welcome to Femme Fantasy, where transformation, elegance, and self-discovery come to life. They said mirrors don't lie, but that night, as I stared at my reflection in the holding cell, I swear it looked back at me with something close to pity. Maybe fear. Or maybe I was just seeing myself clearly for the first time, stripped of the swagger and noise I used to hide behind. My name used to sound like trouble. People flinched when they heard it. I liked that. Being the one nobody could tell what to do felt like power. Until the night I went too far. It's strange how fast the world can shrink. One moment you're outside, drunk on your own rebellion, and the next you're surrounded by walls that hum with fluorescent light and cold metal. The silence in that cell wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with the echo of every choice I'd made. When the guard slid the tray through the slot, I caught my reflection in the steel, blurry, stretched, almost mocking. It was the first time I really saw the eyes behind the bravado. They looked tired. That's when the envelope came. No stamp, no handwriting, just my name in printed letters. Inside was a single line: Rehabilitation Transfer, Unit 9F, Behavior and Identity Reformation. I laughed when I read it. Identity reformation? Sounded like a bad sci-fi experiment. But they didn't ask for my opinion. The van that took me there smelled like plastic and old rain. No windows. Just a hum in the walls and the soft clink of cuffs that didn't even feel tight anymore. I didn't fight it. Maybe part of me was curious. Maybe part of me thought nothing could really change me. I had built myself like armor, layer by layer of defiance, anger, and pride. But armor can rust in silence. When we arrived, the building didn't look like a prison at first. It looked clean. Too clean. White walls, smooth floors, and a strange calmness that made the air feel heavier. A woman in a white uniform met me at the entrance. Calm smile, clipboard, soft voice. Her name tag said Supervisor Lynn. "Welcome, Daniel," she said. "You'll be staying here for the next 12 weeks. I remember smirking. 12 weeks? What's this, a spa for criminals? She didn't react. Just looked at me. Really looked like she could see past my sarcasm. "It's a place for transformation," she said. "Not punishment. You'll understand soon." That word, transformation, stuck to me like static. They took my clothes, my shoes, even my name. From now on, I was Subject 9. They handed me a set of white pajamas, slippers, and a small mirror to keep in my room. "You'll need it," Lynn said. Her voice was so calm it made me nervous. The first few days blurred together, sessions, routines, psychological tests that felt more like theater than therapy. We weren't allowed to speak unless spoken to. Meals were quiet, movement scheduled, voices measured. Every wall had cameras, and every camera had a red light blinking like a heartbeat. Then came the orientation room. It looked like a classroom, but the screen showed no lessons, just faces. Faces of people who used to be like me. Boys who looked lost, then different, then softer. Gentler. One by one, they told their stories in recorded clips. I used to fight everything. Then I learned to let go. I didn't know who I was until I saw her looking back at me. The first time I heard the word feminization, I almost laughed out loud. "You're kidding," I said during my first evaluation. The counselor, a man with kind eyes and a voice like quiet music, just smiled. "Not at all. We believe in harmony, not dominance. You've lived your life in one extreme. This program is about balance." "Balance?" I scoffed. "By turning me into, what, some kind of doll?" He didn't answer. Just slid a small compact mirror across the table. "What you see isn't always who you are," he said. That night, I opened that mirror again. For some reason, I couldn't stop staring. The lighting made my skin look paler, my eyes softer. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe I was starting to see something the mirror had been waiting to show me. I snapped it shut and shoved it under the pillow. Days turned into weeks. We had posture lessons, voice training, emotional workshops, all disguised as balance exercises. Some of the other subjects had already begun changing. Their faces looked different, not just from makeup or expression, but something deeper. They smiled more, talked less. Their anger melted into something else I couldn't name. I told myself I'd never be like them. But then came the reflection phase. They brought us new uniforms, pastel-colored, fitted, oddly delicate. I refused mine at first, but rules were rules. If you resisted, you lost privileges. Food, recreation, even light. So I put it on. The fabric was soft, almost embarrassingly so. I caught myself fidgeting with the sleeve hem, annoyed at how natural it felt between my fingers. When I saw myself in the mirror that day, I didn't recognize me. Not because of the clothes, but because of my expression. The mirror seemed to ask me a question I couldn't answer. Who are you without your defiance? That night, I dreamed of my reflection stepping out of the glass, calm, graceful, whispering in a voice that sounded like mine but gentler. You can't fight yourself forever. I woke up sweating. The next morning, Supervisor Lynn stopped by my room. She noticed the mirror half open on the desk. She's starting to talk to you, isn't she? What are you talking about? I asked. She smiled faintly. Every subject hears her eventually. The version of themselves they've been running from. Don't be afraid of her. Her words unsettled me. But later that day, during the voice modulation exercise, I caught that reflection again. My lips trembled when I tried to lower my tone. It cracked, then softened. The instructor nodded.
There, she said.
Don't force it. Let her speak. Let her speak. Those words echoed through me like a melody I'd forgotten. That evening, when the hall lights dimmed, I sat by the mirror again. I didn't flinch this time. My reflection looked back at me not as an enemy, but as someone waiting to be acknowledged. I touched the glass. It was cool, but I imagined warmth beneath it. And for the first time since I got there, I whispered something I never thought I would. Who are you? The reflection smiled. And in that silent, surreal moment, I realized maybe that was the real beginning of my sentence. Not for what I'd done, but for who I'd refused to see. Have you ever looked into a mirror and wondered if the person staring back was waiting for you to change? The days began to flow together, but not in the same empty way they had before. Something subtle had shifted, not in the walls, not in the routines, but inside me. It started with small things I couldn't explain. How I no longer slammed doors when I was frustrated. How my voice, without my permission, softened when I spoke. How the mirror no longer felt like an enemy surveillance tool, but a quiet companion. Supervisor Lynn called it adaptation. You're allowing balance in, she said during one of our sessions, while I sat across from her, fidgeting with the hem of my pastel sleeve. At first it feels like loss, but it's actually release. Release of what? I asked, half defensive, half curious. The parts of yourself that were only armor. Her words should have made me angry, but instead they settled inside me like a riddle I didn't know how to solve. We had group sessions twice a week. 10 of us sat in a circle, each with the same mirror in our laps. Some boys had already changed so much that their reflections startled me. Their hair had grown softer. Their mannerisms seemed almost rehearsed, or maybe just practiced. They smiled with a strange peace that I envied and feared at the same time. When it was my turn to speak, I shrugged. I don't see what everyone else sees. It's just me in there. Lynn leaned forward slightly. And what is you, Daniel? I hesitated. I was someone who didn't take orders. Someone who didn't care what people thought. Is that strength? She asked quietly. I thought so. And now? I looked down at my reflection, the small mirror glinting in my hands. Now I'm not sure. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It felt like the whole room was breathing for me, waiting. Later that evening, I went back to my dorm and found a small parcel on the bed. Inside was a note. For your next stage, be gentle with yourself. Beneath it lay a folded piece of fabric, soft, peach-colored, delicate. A simple dress. My first instinct was to laugh, maybe even tear it apart. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there for a long time, just touching it. The fabric was impossibly light, like it didn't belong in a place so sterile. I lifted it against the light. It shimmered faintly, almost like a memory trying to surface. I didn't wear it that night. But I couldn't sleep either. When morning came, I found myself standing in front of the mirror again, the dress still folded in my hands. My fingers trembled, not from fear, exactly, but from the strange awareness that I was about to cross an invisible line. I told myself it was just another test, another form of control. But deep down, I knew it was something more. I slipped it on slowly. The fabric brushed against my skin in a way that felt foreign and familiar all at once. My reflection blinked back, startled, not by the sight, but by the calmness in my eyes. For the first time, I didn't flinch. That's when I realized how heavy my body had always felt. All that anger, pride, resistance, like armor I'd worn for too long. The dress didn't make me weak. It made me feel free. When Lynn came for morning inspection, she paused at my door. "You look lighter," she said simply. I wanted to argue, but instead I found myself smiling. "Maybe the air's just better today." She smiled back, but her eyes said she knew. In the cafeteria later, some of the others noticed too. One of them, a quiet guy named Evan, who now went by Eva, leaned over and whispered, "It feels strange, doesn't it? Like seeing yourself for the first time." I didn't answer, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, during lights out, I caught my reflection again. The mirror seemed to glow faintly in the dimness, like it was holding something sacred. I whispered to it, barely audibly, "Is this really me?" And though the room was silent, I swore I heard a voice, gentle, like a memory of wind, say, "It always was." I closed my eyes, and for the first time since I'd been there, I didn't dream of escape. Have you ever discovered something about yourself that frightened you, not because it was wrong, but because it felt too right? The next week began with silence. Not the kind that comes from punishment or isolation. This was a deeper quiet, the kind that happens inside you when something is shifting and you're not sure whether to resist or surrender. Each morning, the corridors of Unit 9F filled with soft music, ambient tones that played from hidden speakers. They said it was part of the Reformation therapy, but it felt more like the soundtrack of some dream I couldn't wake from. I used to hate it. Now I found myself listening. Our lessons had evolved. We no longer just talked about balance, we practiced empathy. Each day, we were paired off for what they called mirroring exercises. Two of us sat facing each other, copying the other's gestures, tone, even breathing. At first, I thought it was ridiculous, a trick to make us compliant. But something happened when I paired with Eva again. She had a gentleness that unnerved me. When she smiled, it wasn't condescending or forced. It was understanding. She moved with ease, her voice measured, patient. I mirrored her gestures reluctantly, but after a while, I couldn't tell who was copying whom. When our eyes met, I felt something ripple through me. Not attraction, not confusion, but recognition. Like I was seeing the version of myself that had learned to breathe again. After the exercise, she whispered, "You're softer than you think." I wanted to deny it, but when I opened my mouth, my voice came out quieter than before. That night, I stayed by the mirror again, the same small one that had been with me since the beginning. Its silver surface had become a kind of confidant, patient, non-judgmental. I'd started to notice how my reflection changed not just in appearance, but in expression. My eyes no longer darted defensively. My mouth no longer tightened when I felt uncertain. I began talking to it in low murmurs, like sharing secrets with a friend. "They're trying to change me," I said one night, tracing my finger along the rim. But maybe I already wanted to change. For a moment, I thought I saw the reflection tilt its head, like it was listening. The corners of its mouth curved slightly. And though I knew it was impossible, I felt it whisper back, a soft echo that wasn't sound but sensation. Then let it happen. The following morning, during a guided exercise, we were told to speak affirmations out loud. Words that, weeks ago, I would have mocked. "I am balanced," the instructor said first. "I am at peace." We repeated. Then, "I am gentle." "I am enough." When it was my turn, my throat tightened. Saying the words felt like confessing a secret I hadn't realized I'd been keeping. I stumbled at first, my voice cracking on gentle. But the instructor's nod encouraged me. That's the sound of honesty, she said. Later, Lynn called me in for evaluation. Her questions were simple, but each felt like a key turning in a lock. Do you feel different? She asked. Yes, I admitted. But I don't know if it's good or bad. It doesn't have to be either, she said. Change isn't moral. It's just movement. I paused. What if I don't recognize myself when this is over? She smiled faintly. That's how recognition begins. There was something haunting in her calmness, like she had seen this happen countless times, yet still cared every time it did. That evening, I caught my reflection humming. It sounds ridiculous, I know. Mirrors don't hum. But I saw my lips move, even before I realized I was softly singing along with the background music. A tune I didn't know I remembered. It was fragile, almost trembling, but it felt like it came from somewhere long buried. A lullaby, maybe something from childhood. The next day, Eva approached me during recreation hour. You sang last night, she said quietly. I froze. How did you? The vents carry sound, she smiled. It was beautiful. I didn't know what to say. Compliments had always felt like traps before, but from her, it felt like sunlight sneaking through bars. From that moment on, something softened between us, not romance, but kinship. We'd sit by the window during quiet time, talking about who we were before the program. She told me about her anger, her shame, her exhaustion. I told her about the mirror. She listened carefully. Maybe she's not separate from you, Eva said. Maybe she's the voice that's been waiting for silence to speak. That night, when I opened the mirror again, I asked, were you always there? And though the reflection stayed silent, her eyes, my eyes, seemed to say, always. That was the first night I cried. Not out of sadness, but release. The tears felt strange, but right, like rain after years of drought. When I looked at myself again, my reflection didn't mock me. It simply waited. Maybe that's what transformation really is, not a sudden change, but a quiet waiting until you're ready to meet the person you've always been becoming. Have you ever heard a version of your own voice that felt like the truth you'd been avoiding? The air in Unit 9F began to feel different after that week, lighter somehow, though the routines stayed the same. Each morning still began with that soft music. Each session still circled around the word balance, but something inside me had shifted. I didn't flinch at my reflection anymore. I didn't hide behind the armor of sarcasm. I was starting to hear my own thoughts differently, slower, quieter, kinder. Our next phase was called expression therapy. It took place in a room lined with mirrors on every wall. At first, the brightness of it was overwhelming. Dozens of reflections staring back, each one slightly different. Some showed who I was, others who I could be. The instructor, a woman named Marin, asked us to perform small movements in front of our reflections, gestures that conveyed emotion. A raised hand, a bowed head, a slow spin. Don't act, she said. Feel. Let your body answer before your mind interrupts. I thought it was absurd, but when it was my turn, I stepped forward and caught my reflection's eyes. Something in me loosened. My shoulders dropped. My breathing steadied. I raised my hand, trembling slightly, and my reflection did the same, softer, calmer. For a moment, it felt like she was leading me, not the other way around. The exercise turned into something deeper. We were told to speak a line to our reflection. Anything honest. My voice cracked when I whispered, I don't know who I am anymore. And my reflection, or maybe just the way the light shifted, seemed to whisper back, that's where everyone begins. After the session, I sat outside the hall for a while, trying to catch my breath. The other participants passed by, some smiling faintly, some wiping away quiet tears. It wasn't about becoming someone new anymore. It was about shedding the old layers we thought were unbreakable. Eva sat beside me. Do you know what I think? She said softly. Maybe the goal isn't to erase who we were, but to make peace with them. Her words landed gently but heavily. I thought of my old self, the version of me who clenched his fists to feel strong, who shouted just to be heard. I didn't hate him. I just didn't want to live trapped inside him anymore. That night, Lynn called me into her office. She looked at me the way she always did, calmly, like she was reading the spaces between my words. "Do you remember why you came here?" she asked. I nodded. Because I couldn't control myself. And now, I'm learning that control isn't strength. Sometimes it's the absence of fear. She smiled. Good. You're beginning to understand the real lesson. She opened a small drawer and handed me something wrapped in white cloth. This belonged to a former participant. She said it helped her remember who she was becoming. Inside was a silver pendant, a tiny mirror, oval-shaped, no bigger than my thumb. I held it carefully. It caught the light, throwing soft reflections across the room. She said it reminded her that change isn't about replacing your reflection, Lynn added. It's about recognizing it. That night, I wore it around my neck. When I looked into it, the reflection was small and incomplete, just fragments of my face. But somehow, it felt more whole than the full mirrors ever had. Weeks passed, and we began something called the rehearsal. It was meant to prepare us for re-entry. How to speak, how to interact, how to carry the calm we'd learned into a world that wouldn't always understand it. We practiced introductions, posture, conversation. Not scripts exactly, but new ways of being. I found my voice shifting, not just in tone, but in intention. I spoke slower, listened more. The words that used to feel heavy with pride now carried something closer to grace. On the final day of rehearsal, we stood in front of the mirrors one last time. Marin asked us to say a single word that captured who we were now. Some said peace, others truth. When it was my turn, I looked at my reflection, the version of me who had waited patiently all along, and said, "Becoming." She smiled back, as if to say, "Finally." That night, the mirror on my bedside table reflected the pendant's faint glimmer, and for the first time, I didn't see a prisoner at all. Just someone finally learning to live in their own skin. Have you ever realized that the hardest person to forgive is the one you used to be? The morning came with a new kind of silence, not the empty kind, but the full one. The air in Unit 9F hummed softly, as if something unseen had shifted overnight. The walls didn't feel so close anymore. Even the guards, who used to move like shadows, walked slower now, like the atmosphere itself had learned to breathe. That day, Lynn called us to the assembly room. She stood on the small stage with her clipboard pressed against her chest. "You've all reached the halfway point," she said, her voice calm but strong. "From here on, everything is choice." Choice. It was a strange word in a place that once dictated every move. "We've taken your old names to strip away the noise," she continued. "But names also rebuild us. It's time for each of you to choose one." The room filled with an uncertain rustle, whispers, glances, soft breaths of disbelief. A name. A word that could feel like both a beginning and an ending. Eva went first, of course. She rose slowly, her new calm almost radiant. "Eva," she said, steady and proud, because she was the first to start again. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then, one by one, the others followed, soft syllables spoken into the air like fragile offerings. Each name felt like a small light flickering to life. When it was my turn, I hesitated. My old name still sat heavy inside me. Daniel. Sharp, sure, stubborn. A name that had felt like armor. But the reflection in my pendant whispered something softer. "Danny," I said finally. The word trembled at first, but when I repeated it, it settled. Danny. It felt strange, but also right. Like the first breath after crying. Lynn nodded. "Then welcome, Danny." After that day, everything began to move differently. The instructors started addressing us by our chosen names. Our routines shifted to fewer drills, more reflection. We were given journals to write in, free time to paint, sing, or simply exist. I spent most of my evenings by the window, sketching what I remembered of the outside world. Streets. Faces. Sunlight. But each time I tried to draw myself, I paused. I never knew how to finish the outline. Maybe because I was still finding the shape. Eva sometimes joined me, humming quietly as she braided her hair. "It's strange," she said once, "how freedom can feel heavier than confinement." I nodded. Because when there's no one left to tell you who to be, you have to start asking yourself, We both laughed softly, not out of humor, but recognition. One evening, during quiet hours, Lynn stopped by. She looked at my sketches and smiled. "You're starting to see yourself clearly," she said. "I'm starting to," I replied, "but it's like drawing fog." "That's what growth looks like," she said. "It's never fully in focus until you live it." Before she left, she touched the silver pendant around my neck. "Keep that close," she said. "You'll need it when the world outside asks questions." That night, I sat in front of my mirror again. The light was dim, the air still. My reflection, the one I once feared, looked calm now. Her eyes were steady. "Danny," I said aloud, testing it again. My voice felt new. "Do you think the world will see me?" The reflection smiled faintly. "If you let them." I touched the glass lightly. "What if they laugh?" "Then smile first." I laughed quietly at that, half in disbelief, half in awe. It sounded like advice my mother might have given if she were here. The next morning, I woke before the music began. The hallways were empty, washed in soft gray light. I caught my reflection in a window, faint, blurred by the dawn, and realized I didn't look like someone waiting for permission anymore. Maybe names don't just identify us. Maybe they remind us of who we've decided to be. Have you ever chosen a version of yourself so different that even your own name sounded like a new beginning? Graduation wasn't what I expected. There were no crowds, no applause, no doors thrown open to sunlight. Just a quiet ceremony inside the main hall. 10 of us sitting in a circle, a single candle burning in the center. Lynn spoke softly, almost in a whisper, as if she didn't want to disturb the moment we'd been waiting for. "You came here carrying walls," she said. "You're leaving with windows." Each of us received a simple envelope. Inside was a letter, written by ourselves during the first week, before the program had begun to change us. Mine started with anger. Every line was sharp, defiant, full of words I barely recognized as my own. Reading it now felt like staring into a photograph of someone I once knew but couldn't return to being. Eva glanced over and smiled gently. "He was trying to protect you," she said. "I know," I whispered, "but I think I can protect myself differently now." After the ceremony, we were allowed to walk outside the courtyard for the first time. The sky was pale and endless. The air carried that scent of rain on stone that only exists when freedom is near. We stood there quietly, not sure what to do with the vastness in front of us. When it was my turn to leave, Lynn met me by the gate. "You'll hear the world again," she said. "Voices that tell you who you should be. Remember, you don't have to believe any of them." I nodded, clutching the pendant around my neck. "Will it ever feel normal?" She smiled faintly. "It will feel real. That's better." Then the gate opened, and the noise of the city spilled in. Cars, wind, laughter. For a moment, it was overwhelming. My heartbeat echoed in my ears like a drum. But beneath it all, I felt a strange calm, as if something inside me had already learned how to move through the noise. The first weeks outside were harder than I'd imagined. People stared sometimes. Old friends avoided eye contact, confused by the softness in my tone, the ease in my steps. I told myself not to take it personally. They were seeing what I'd only recently begun to accept. I found a small apartment near the edge of town, one window, one mirror. Every morning, I'd stand in front of it before leaving for work. The person in the reflection looked back with quiet confidence, even on days when I didn't feel it. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to her again, just like before. "We're doing it," I'd whisper. "We're still here." And in the faint gleam of glass, I'd imagine her smile. But not every day was calm. Some days the world's noise found cracks in my quiet. A stranger's laugh, a memory of who I used to be, a question I couldn't answer fast enough. They all tugged at me, small reminders that healing isn't a straight line. One evening, I found myself walking aimlessly, ending up by the river that cut through the city. The water was dark, moving fast, like time itself refusing to stop. I took out the pendant, held it to the fading light, and for a moment saw both reflections, the old me and the new one, blending in the silver curve. It hit me then that both versions still lived inside me. Neither was wrong. One was just learning to listen to the other. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Freedom isn't a doorway. It's a conversation, one that never really ends." When I closed the notebook, I felt lighter. The next morning, the mirror by the window caught the sunrise perfectly. My reflection glowed in the soft gold light, eyes half awake but calm. And in that stillness, I heard her voice again, gentle, certain, almost like a promise. "You're not becoming her. You've always been her." I smiled. "Maybe both," I whispered back. "Have you ever realized that every version of you, the broken, the brave, the soft, was never your enemy, just your beginning? It's strange how silence can sound different when you no longer fear it." For weeks after leaving Unit 9F, my apartment was almost too quiet, yet I didn't fill it with music or television. I wanted to hear my own breathing, to know what calm really sounded like. The world outside rushed endlessly, but within those four walls, time felt patient. I started a job at a small bookstore downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, quiet, and full of stories. Each spine on the shelf seemed to whisper pieces of lives rebuilt, of people finding themselves again. I shelved books, dusted windows, learned the rhythm of the register. Customers came and went without looking too closely, and that was fine. I wasn't ready to be looked at the way I used to be. One afternoon, a child came in with his mother. He ran straight to the mirror by the entrance, the one meant for checking umbrellas and coats, and started making faces. His laughter filled the store like sunlight. When he saw me watching, he grinned. "Do you ever do that?" he asked. "What?" "Talk to the person in the mirror." I paused. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Do they talk back?" "Sometimes," I said again. He seemed satisfied with that and ran off toward the children's section. After they left, I caught my reflection in that same mirror. I almost laughed. There she was again, steady, gentle, amused by the smallest joy. It wasn't the polished reflection from Unit 9F, but something truer, tired, content, alive. In the evenings, I'd visit Eva. She lived across town in a small studio where the walls were covered in sketches. She had started painting portraits, faces half in shadow, half in light. "They're us," she said once. The parts that never stopped talking. I watched her paint, and for the first time in a long time, I saw beauty that wasn't about perfection. It was about honesty. We talked for hours about what after felt like. How people mistook calm for weakness. How the hardest part wasn't changing, but choosing to stay changed when the world didn't understand. "Sometimes I want to explain everything," I said. "Tell them what the program was, what it did." Eva shook her head. "You don't owe explanations. Just live in a way that makes your peace visible." That night, back in my apartment, I wrote that sentence down. "Live, so your peace is visible." It became a mantra of sorts. I repeated it before bed. In the morning, whenever doubt returned. The seasons shifted. My hair grew longer. My voice softened without my trying. I'd catch people calling me miss at the cafe or ma'am on the phone, and I wouldn't correct them. Not because I was pretending, but because arguing would have meant denying something I'd already accepted. Sometimes I missed the structure of Unit 9F, the routines, the stillness, the constant reminder to breathe. Out here, the world moved fast, unfiltered. But I learned to find small rituals, morning tea, a walk by the river, a glance at the pendant's reflection when life felt too loud. One evening, the mirror by my window caught the city's lights instead of sunrise. For a moment, I saw the old me again, not scowling or angry, just watching, proud somehow. I whispered, "Thank you for surviving long enough to meet me." The reflection shimmered faintly, and in that shimmer, I felt forgiveness. Both ways. A knock on the door startled me. It was Eva, holding 2 cups of tea and a new canvas under her arm. She laughed softly. "I couldn't paint this one without you." On the canvas, 2 figures faced each other across a pane of glass. One reached out, the other reached back, their fingers almost touching. The background was gold, like dawn. "It's called The Quiet Between Heartbeats," she said. I stared at it for a long time. The painting felt alive. "That's what it was, wasn't it?" I murmured. the space between who we were and who we're becoming. Eva nodded. That's where the truth lives. That night, after she left, I looked in my mirror again and thought about that quiet space. The heartbeat between the old and the new. Maybe that's what transformation really is, not a leap, but a breath. Have you ever paused long enough to notice the moment between who you were and who you're becoming? Autumn pressed in gently that year. The air turned crisp, the city's edges softened by mist that rolled in from the river. Leaves gathered on the sidewalks in colors too vivid to last. I found myself walking slower, taking longer routes home, as if the world had more to tell me now that I finally listened. The bookstore had become my anchor. The regulars started to know my name, Danny, and nothing inside me flinched when I heard it anymore. One of them, an older woman with silver hair, once said, "You have a peaceful way about you, dear. Like someone who's fought storms and learned to dance in the rain." I smiled and thanked her, but her words followed me all day. Maybe peace wasn't the absence of storms. Maybe it was learning how to move with them. In the evenings, I kept returning to the river. It was never quiet there. Traffic hummed on the bridge. Water slapped against the rocks, but it carried a rhythm that made sense. I'd sit on the bench with the pendant in my palm, the tiny mirror catching the last light. The reflection was always fractured by the ripples of water, but I liked that. It reminded me that clarity doesn't mean stillness. One night, I saw a man standing downstream, shoulders hunched, staring into the current the way I used to stare into the mirror. I didn't speak to him, but I recognized the weight he carried, the kind that sits just behind the ribs, the unspoken ache of someone who doesn't yet know how to start again. When I got home, I stood in front of my mirror and whispered, "Help me remember kindness when I see myself in others." It became another quiet ritual. Days grew shorter. The city's noise thickened with early darkness, yet inside my apartment, the air always felt bright. I had started painting again, borrowing Eva's old brushes. My first piece was small. The river at dusk, the reflection of the sky breaking in silver shards. I called it The Mirror and the River. When Eva saw it, she laughed softly. "You've painted peace," she said. "I've painted motion," I replied. Peace just came with it. She smiled in that quiet way of hers, the way we learned back in Unit 9F, where silence spoke louder than any words. Later that week, a letter arrived from Lynn. It was short, handwritten in that steady script I would recognize anywhere. "Danny, we never really finished changing. We just learned to walk beside the version of ourselves that once needed saving. When you doubt, listen for her voice. She's still there, waiting to remind you how far you've come." I folded the letter and placed it beside the mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw both of us reflected there, the old and the new, standing side by side. Winter crept in quietly, frost painting lace on the window glass. I would catch my reflection in it each morning, blurred but content. The person staring back no longer felt like a stranger or a story. She felt real, grounded, quietly alive. Sometimes, walking to work, I'd hear echoes of the old noise, arguments, laughter, the pulse of the city. But they didn't drown me anymore. They passed through, like wind through open doors. And every now and then, when I caught sight of my reflection in a window or a puddle or the curved surface of a spoon, she would smile first, just to remind me that she was still listening. Have you ever looked at your reflection and realized it no longer asks questions? It simply agrees that you finally arrived? The first time I went back to the gates of Unit 9F, snow had just begun to fall. I hadn't planned it. My feet had simply carried me there, past the narrow streets and quiet outskirts, until the familiar iron fence stood before me once more. It looked smaller than I remembered. The world outside had grown, and maybe so had I. The building still carried that strange calm, the kind of silence that used to terrify me but now felt almost sacred. The guards didn't stop me when I said I was a former resident. They only nodded, as if they'd seen this kind of pilgrimage before. Inside, the air still smelled faintly of lavender and soap, the same way it had the first night I arrived, shaking with anger and disbelief. Lynn met me in the hallway, her face soft with the same calm authority that once frightened me. You came back, she said simply. I wasn't sure why, I admitted. Maybe to see if it was real. She nodded. Transformation always feels like a dream when you survive it. We walked the corridors together, past the classrooms, the courtyard, the long mirror in the common room where I had once stood trembling, refusing to look. I stopped in front of it now, watching my reflection framed in the same glass that had once held my fear. It was still there, that faint shimmer, not of distortion, but of memory. The person I used to be seemed to watch me from somewhere deep within the reflection. He wasn't angry anymore, just proud. I used to hate this mirror, I said quietly. I know, Lynn replied. It never hated you back. She left me there for a moment, alone with the silence that had once been unbearable. I stepped closer, studying every line of my face, the softness that had replaced tension, the quiet that had replaced rage. My eyes met themselves, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I raised the pendant to the glass. The twin reflections of the silver surface and my face overlapped perfectly, no more dividing line between who I was and who I had become. Then, softly, I said, "Thank you." I wasn't sure to whom, to the mirror, to Lynn, to the frightened boy I used to be, but it felt right. When I turned to leave, the hallways seemed brighter somehow, as though every harsh fluorescent light had dimmed into something gentle. Lynn caught up with me by the door. "Danny," she said, "what do you see when you look in that mirror now?" "Not her," I said. "Not him. Just me." She smiled, small, knowing, proud. "Then you've graduated twice." Outside, the snow had thickened, covering the old tracks in the dirt. Each step I took left a faint imprint, only to be softened moments later by new flakes falling quietly from the sky. Walking away, I realized something simple but profound. That transformation isn't about what you become, but what you choose to keep once you change. Back home that night, I lit a candle by the mirror and set the pendant beside it. Its silver caught the flame, scattering light across the walls. I stood there watching the reflections dance until my eyes blurred with warmth. The person in the glass smiled, tired but certain. And beneath the hum of the city outside, I heard that same soft voice, the one that had followed me from the beginning. "You don't need permission to be whole anymore." I smiled back. "I know," I whispered. Have you ever returned to a place that once broke you, only to realize it had been quietly saving you all along? Spring came quietly that year, as if the world wanted to start over with me. The snow melted into soft streams along the sidewalks, and the air carried that unmistakable scent of wet soil, the smell of beginnings. I'd walk to work each morning beneath trees still half bare, buds trembling at their edges, waiting for warmth to give them permission to bloom. Life had settled into something calm, but it wasn't empty. The bookstore had become more than a job. It was a kind of home. I knew every creak of the floorboards, every beam of sunlight that moved across the counter as the day passed. Customers still came and went, faces I might forget, but stories I always felt. One morning, a young man entered, nervous, holding a folded note. He glanced around before asking, Did you ever live at Unit 9F? I froze. It had been months since I'd even heard those words aloud. Yes, I said carefully. A long time ago. He nodded, eyes darting. My sister's there now. She says they talk about someone named Danny, who changed everything. I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened. They still talk about us? About you, he said softly. She said they use your story as a kind of hope. The words hit harder than I expected. Hope, the one thing I'd struggled to give myself, now handed back through a stranger's voice. I smiled, maybe for him, maybe for her, maybe for all of us who'd stood trembling before a mirror, not knowing who we'd find there. After he left, I went to the river. It was brighter now, the surface glimmering with sunlight like scattered glass. I took the pendant from my pocket, the same one that had followed me through every change, and held it up to the light. For the first time, I saw no difference between the sky's reflection and my own. They shimmered together, one shape, one glow. I remembered what Lynn had written. We never finished changing. She was right. But maybe that was the beauty of it, that we don't have to reach a final form to be whole. We just have to keep becoming gently, endlessly. That night, as dusk folded into the city, I lit my candle again. The flame flickered against the mirror, bending light across the walls like whispers of everything I'd lived through. My reflection smiled softly, not as a stranger or a teacher or a survivor, but simply as someone who'd made peace with the noise inside. I touched the glass once more, fingertips brushing the cool surface, and whispered the words I'd once feared to say aloud. Thank you for staying with me. In that still moment, the light seemed to pass through the mirror instead of bouncing back, as though it no longer needed to separate me from my own reflection. And for the first time, I understood what freedom really meant. Not escape, not disguise, but truth, soft, steady, and shining quietly, even when no one else is watching. The mirror no longer asked me who I was. It simply showed me that I'd already found the answer. Have you ever realized that becoming yourself wasn't a destination at all, just the light that was waiting, patiently, beyond the glass?